Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dom Dumais, and I'm in Bangkok. Professional Wrestling Terminology, Episode 20. Now, since I've done 2 podcasts about professional wrestling, I did a podcast about my favorite promotions and my favorite professional wrestlers, and that would be, you could find that at domdumas.com/6. And I also did a podcast about my time in the National Wrestling Federation, which was a professional wrestling for kids back in the 1980s. And you can find that at domdumas.com/16. But with doing those 2 episodes, I had a few questions from a few of my friends. And they wanted to know what some of the terminology was. Like, there were some things that they didn't understand. And that's understandable. If it's not something that you've grown up watching or being around or experiencing, like anything else, the terminology in it could be a bit confusing at times. So this episode, I'm going to focus on that a little bit. First, there's a difference between federations and alliances. Now, a federation is just a single independent, well, not necessarily independent, but a single wrestling promotion, like the WWF or the WWE. The WWE used to be the World Wrestling Federation. Now it's called WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. But prior to this, it used to be called the World Wrestling Federation. And before that, it was called the World Wide Wrestling Federation, the WWWF. Now, an alliance is an organization of a group of different promotions that work together. You know, they have a single world champion. Now, each promotion may have their own promotion champion, but they have one person who is their world champion that goes from organization to organization or from federation to federation. And they also have like tag teams, world tag team champions that go from federation to federation. And sometimes these alliances, they also travel overseas to Japan. For example, one thing is they very often would travel to Japan or to Puerto Rico or to Mexico or Cuba and things like that. Now, going back to my example of the WWE. The WWE at one point in time, like I said before, was the WWF. And before that, before Vince McMahon, the current Vince McMahon that you see now running the promotion, his father ran the promotion, and that was the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, the WWWF. And that used to be a part of the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, which, like I said, was a group of different promotions. They had one champion, and that champion would travel around from promotion to promotion and wrestle for the title. And usually they would put over, or they would make that local guy look good, but still have him lose. And then sometimes that local promotion didn't like the fact that they had to lose. So sometimes they would try to break off and try to make a go of it themselves. And sometimes it worked. In the example of the WWE, obviously it's worked. It's become huge. An example of where it worked for a short period of time, but then in the end didn't work so well would be with the WCW, World Championship Wrestling, or WCW. The World Championship Wrestling, they broke away from the NWA and started their own promotion. That prior to becoming WCW, they were part of Jim Crockett Promotions, and they wrestled and they were affiliated with the NWA. And then they separated, and they actually took a lot of their better wrestlers, for example, Ric Flair and Sting, Lex Luger, and they started the WCW. Now, the WCW back in the 80s, actually, the WCW didn't really start going until the late 80s, early 90s, once that happened, then they started trying to compete with the WWF. Back then it was the WWF. And for a while, they were actually beating them. And the Monday Night Wars, they called them the Monday Night Wars. And they had Monday Night Nitro, which was actually really good for both promotions. And I loved it. Now, I'll be honest, I was a WCW guy because Ric Flair, my all-time favorite wrestler, though, yes, he did wrestle from a few times in the WWE, and now he's affiliated with the WWE because there's no more WCW. And also Sting, and yes, Sting has wrestled in the WWE also. When I was really into wrestling, honestly, I wasn't a big fan of what the WWF, WWE was doing with wrestling. I felt that they kind of turned it into a bit of a carnival. But don't get me wrong, Vince McMahon is a freaking genius. He has made millions of dollars with what he's done. And it's unbelievable. Now, the only thing I don't like is now he is the only big promotion in the United States. Nobody can compete with him. Now, on a local level, there's a lot of small little promotions all over the United States. And there's like 2 or 3 in Minnesota alone, as far as I know. Which is where I'm from originally. And I saw one come up on one of my news feeds on Facebook about a local promotion, and I tried to promote them. I asked my friends to go see them. Now, whether they did or not, I'm not sure. I didn't get a chance to ask them. I know one of them got sick, so there's probably a chance that they didn't go. But hey, that happens. No worries. It's not such a big deal. But one of the nice things about the independent circuits is they don't always have to, they have to compete with each other. All the local promotions, they compete with each other, and they try not to have shows on Monday nights. Understandable, but they usually will have a show on like a Friday or Saturday night. And I'll tell you what, these guys work for money. They work for what little money that they make. You look at the guys in the WWE, and yeah, they're on the road 300 plus days a year, and they make a ton of money. Absolutely. They work very, very hard for it, and they absolutely earn it. But these guys in these smaller promotions, the local promotions, they make very little. Sometimes they make just enough to buy a meal, fill their car with gas, and go to the next show. So my recommendation for my listeners that are in the United States, if there's and if you're a wrestling fan, or even if you're not a wrestling fan, check it out. Go see one of these local promotions. Now, it's not going to be all bedazzled and spectacular like the WWE, but these guys generally can put on a good show, and they're really in it for the love of the sport, or for the love of wrestling. They love it so much. They put their bodies on the line almost every night of the week, to put on these shows. And a lot of these guys have regular jobs. So when it comes time to wrestle, they put on their character, and they become this professional wrestler. So if you get a chance, go check out any of your local promotions. And go with an open mind. And I'll tell you what, you're probably going to be pretty surprised. And if you do go see one of these local promotions, wherever you're at in the world, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Send me a message. Send me an email. I don't care. Send me a text. Post a message on my Facebook page. Post a message on domdumas.com. And let me know what you thought. Now, inside of these wrestling federations and alliances, there are different types of smaller groups. Like you have tag teams. Tag teams generally are 2 guys that work together, and their objective is to get the World Tag Team Championship belts, it's a great honor. Don't get me wrong. I held the National Tag Team Champions when I was in the NWF. Now, I didn't hold them as Mr. Destroyer. I know. I held them as Rattlesnake Jake, somebody who wasn't even a character of my creation. It was a character of somebody else's creation. But I got to hold that belt, and it felt good. So the tag teams, like I said, are generally 2 guys. Now, once it starts becoming more than 2 guys, like 3 guys, it starts to become what's called a stable. Now, one of the few times where it wasn't really a stable was the Freebirds. Now, they weren't really a tag team, but they weren't really a stable. I would personally call them a stable because it was more than 2 guys. In my opinion, 2 guys make a tag team. Now, if there's 3, it could be a 6-man tag team situation, yes. But that's when you start getting into stables, in my opinion. Now, a stable is a group of people inside a promotion that has 3 or 4 or 5 different wrestlers, and they usually have one particular manager that kind of controls all of them. And in my opinion, one of the best formations of this type of stable would be the Four Horsemen. The Four Horsemen, in my opinion, were so groundbreaking in the 80s. Now, there were stables loosely before that, and there were stables after that. But the Four Horsemen, throughout the years, almost every generation of the Four Horsemen, in my opinion, was phenomenal. And once there was a Four Horsemen, every other group of tag team wrestlers or wrestlers that wanted to band together with 4 people tried to be the Four Horsemen. And they kind of set the bar. And for me, that was like, wow, And of course, I loved the Four Horsemen anyway, because Ric Flair he wasn't the head of it, but he was the world champion, and he was in the Four Horsemen. And they were just phenomenal. Now, back in the early days, the first manager, as far as I know, of the Four Horsemen would have been J.J. Dillon, and he was a manager. And the Four Horsemen absolutely were a stable. They were a stable of 4 wrestlers. Now, they very often would trade out one wrestler for another wrestler. But the main wrestlers was always Ric Flair, Arn Anderson. They were the main 2 wrestlers. Now, Tully Blanchard was with the Four Horsemen for a very, very long time. And Ole Anderson was a member. Sting was a member. Lex Luger was a member. Steve Mongo McMichael was a member. Chris Benoit was a member. And there's been a ton of them. But the 2 main ones would be Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. And those are stables. Stables, are, like I said, are usually 3 or more wrestlers together, kind of going for they have an objective, either to make one person the world heavyweight champion or U.S. heavyweight champion or whatever the local promotion's heavyweight champion is, to make 2 of the guys the tag team champions, be it world tag team champions or the national tag team champions or U.S. tag team champions or whatever. Their objective is to make one of their guys the main champion of the organization, and 2 of the guys like a tag team champion. So they want to hold all the gold, and gold usually means title belts. Now I've told you about tag teams. I've told you about stables. Now, the Freebirds were really kind of special because they did a lot of things almost brand new or new and groundbreaking in professional wrestling. One of the things that they did is they when they started playing music to their entrance, when they would come down to the ring, at a time that was almost unheard of. Very, very, very few people did it. And it caught on, mostly because the song that they chose was so well known, which would have been Freebird by Leonard Skinner, an amazing song. And then he ended up, the leader of the Freebirds ended up having a new song made, which was called Bad Street USA, and it was a great rock and roll song. And it, as soon as you heard it, you knew the Freebirds were coming. And the Road Warriors, when they would come out, they played Iron Man by Black Sabbath. So when those songs started, once music started becoming such a big part of the wrestling industry, you heard a song, You knew exactly who it was going to be. And that's how it is today. I mean, you see it today when you watch wrestling. If you watch wrestling now at all, you go to a live show, or you watch it on television, or you watch it on the computer, you on the internet, you watch it on YouTube, or wherever you happen to watch it. As soon as you hear a song, if you're a fan of that promotion, you know who's coming. Or if you're not a fan of that promotion and you hear a song from another wrestler, you know who's coming. You know, the Freebirds kind of started that. Another thing that they started was also the Freebird rule, which was if you had to wrestle a tag team match against the Freebirds, it could be any two of the three Freebirds. They never, as far as I can remember, they never signed a contract for a tag team match that was two specific members of the Freebirds. It was for the Freebirds. You had a match against the Freebirds. So you didn't know who was going to be in your match until you got down to the ring and they came out. Now, yes, I know wrestling is scripted, so they did really know. I'm not breaking kayfabe here. Everybody knows wrestling is pretty much scripted. There are a few instances where it's not. There are a few instances where you've got wrestlers that are really good workers. And just a good worker means a wrestler who's really good at what he does. They know a guy and they can really work together and help bring a match. And some of these good workers would be Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair, Bret Hart. You know, they don't need a lot of preparation time. They just need to know who's going to win, how long to make the match last, and that's what they do. But yeah, the Freebird rule is whoever you sign a contract to wrestle the Freebirds, and it could be any of the three, any two of the three, or if you're in a singles match, it could be any one of the three. But I don't think that ever happened. I know if you wrestled a tag team match, or you signed to wrestle a tag team match against the Freebirds, 9 times out of 10 it was going to be the Freebird rule, and it could be any two of the three Freebirds. So that's what the Freebird rule was. Now, you have different, I guess you could call them alignments, different types of wrestlers of how they acted. Now, you have the best way to, I'm going to just try and keep it very, very simple because it can become quite complicated. Now, you have what's called a baby face. No matter what they do, they are loved. And they generally don't cheat. They don't break the rules. But no matter what arena they're in, no matter who they're wrestling against, they are absolutely loved by the fans. Excuse me. Now, a good example of this would be any of the Von Erichs, except for Fritz. Any of the Von Erichs kids, Kerry Von Erich, David Von Erich, Kevin Von Erich, they were baby faces through and through. They could do no wrong in the fans' eyes. Sting mostly was a baby face until later in his career. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, huge baby face. And it would be so wrong to make him wrestle as a bad guy. So if you wanted somebody to get over as a bad guy, you would usually put him in the ring against the Von Erichs or against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat or early Sting. Now, then you have a face. And a face is just generally a good guy. The fans know he's a good guy. Sometimes he breaks the rules. You know, sometimes they usually like to cheer for him. But, you know, he's not as over as a baby face. You know, so he's a good guy, but he's not as good of a good guy as a babyface. Now, on the opposite side, you have a heel, which is basically a bad guy. He will do anything and everything to win a match and also to get the fans to hate him or hate them. Now, some of the best heels I've ever seen would have been Ric Flair. Ric Flair was phenomenal. He could go to North Carolina, which is where he's from. Or not, that's not where he's from. That's where he lives now, in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he could be in an interview, and talking and start off. Everybody will be loving him. They'll be cheering him and going, woo, in the background. And within minutes, he can get that crowd so riled up and hating him and want to tear him apart. He was so good at manipulating crowds. I've always loved him for that simple fact, and because he was a great wrestler. But just the way he could control people, it was just unbelievable. Another really good heel would have to have been the Missing Link. Now, he didn't do a lot in professional wrestling, and as far as I know, he only wrestled in Texas Championship Wrestling or World Class Championship Wrestling. And this guy, everything he did, it didn't matter if he was breaking the rules or wasn't breaking the rules. He was a bad guy. He didn't talk. He had a partially shaved head with a little bit of hair up front and a hair in the back that he would use to hold on to if he was going to headbutt somebody. So he would hold on to it to headbutt him and things like that. He was always, always, always a bad guy. So he was always a heel. Now, in modern day wrestling, it's hard to say because people flip-flop from side to side so much. It's really hard to say who's really a heel and who's really a baby face or who's really a face. Now, there are a few people that are baby faces. Like, I know John Cena started off as a face and he went heel, and for whatever reason, whatever he did, he just could do no wrong and became a babyface for quite a long time. That was kind of cool because I do like John Cena. He's a great wrestler. Now, but other than that, I mean, heels are really hard. A true heel are really hard to find. A good example would probably be Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Triple H. He can be quite a good heel. Or Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon is a great heel owner. And people just love to hate Vince McMahon. Just like they used to love to hate Ric Flair. Now we're going to talk about types of wrestlers, like wrestling styles of wrestlers. Your very basic wrestler, they were brawlers, and all they did was really throw punches and kicks, maybe bear hugs, a body slam from time to time. Not a lot of scientific ability, not a lot of power in their move, what we would call power moves, which would be like a suplex, or they would go in there and slug it out. And a good example of this would probably be King Kong Bundy. And if you don't know who it is, I'll try to find a picture to post on the show notes, which will be domdumas.com/20 of King Kong Bundy. But he was a really big guy, and he didn't do a lot of he didn't do any real scientific moves that I can think of. He'd just basically squash guys. He'd pound them, he'd squeeze them, he'd hammer them, he'd kick them, everything that he could. But he didn't do maybe a body slam from time to time, a body splash. He would jump on him, absolutely. But things like that. So, that's a typical type of brawler. Next, you have what I would call a power wrestler. Now, power wrestlers do a lot of what we call power moves. Like I said just a few seconds ago, they did body slams. They did suplexes. They did things where they could pick guys up in the air and press them over their head. A press slam or a gorilla slam. And a great example of this would be the Road Warriors. And they were hugely strong. They were amazingly strong. And they would overpower their opponents most times. And they were great to watch. They had so much energy. Now, on the flip side of these two types of wrestlers, the brawlers and the power wrestlers, we have scientific wrestlers or technical wrestlers. Now, these guys who really understood wrestling on a different level. And usually guys like this, they came from a wrestling background. Not always, but some of they did things like snapmares and heel throws and arm drags and toe locks and, different things like that. And a good example of these type of wrestlers, one would be Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle, a fairly modern, phenomenal, scientific, technical wrestler, Olympic gold medalist for wrestling. Go figure. Ric Flair has forgotten more moves than than most modern wrestlers know. And Bret Hart. 3 amazingly scientific and technical wrestlers. They were great in their field. Now, the next level would be, or the next type of wrestler, which would be the high flyers. Now, in the 80s, a guy that was a high flyer it was a guy that just climbed the rope and jumped off and hit somebody, or did a lot of drop kicks and jumped around a lot. But as time went on, into the 90s, these are guys that were doing things like backflips off the top rope and doing these amazing forward flips, or doing gainers off of the ropes, either onto the mat to guys standing up in the ring or laying down in the ring, or guys that were standing outside. They would jump through the ropes, they would jump over the ropes just to get this guy. And some great high flyers that I can picture in my head that I can tell you about would be guys like Rey Mysterio Jr. is a phenomenal high flyer. I don't know if he wrestles anymore, but I'll have a check. And a lot of the Japanese wrestlers, and a lot of guys from the Mexican wrestling federations, phenomenal high flyers. Eddie Guerrero was another great high flyer. So these are the type of wrestlers that do a lot of jumping, flying over things, diving off of rafters, and things like that. And these guys they all put their bodies on the line, but these guys kind of go to the next level, and it's just amazing I'm still amazed every time I watch a show that has these type of wrestlers. Now, I don't watch as often as I used to, but still, it's still quite amazing to watch guys like this. Now, the last kind of wrestler I'm going to tell you about is kind of you don't see them much anymore. They're called jobbers. And because of live shows and pay-per-views, the jobber has kind of gone away. Maybe you'll see them from time to time, but these are the guys that do everything in their power to make their opponent look good, and they lose. So they make sure their opponent gets the push, gets the win, and looks good in front of the crowd. Doesn't matter if they're a bad guy, a heel, or a face, or a baby face, or anything like that. These are the guys that were known for getting people started in their careers, or in the climbing of their careers. And it was never a very glorious job, because usually jobbers were put into what we called squash matches. And a squash match is where the guy comes in that is going to lose, and the other guy comes in who is going to win, and the guy who's going to win just crushes this guy, the guy who's going to lose, and just annihilates him, pummels him, beats him down, does everything he can to him, and then finally, eventually, after a few minutes of crushing this guy to 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, he pins him. So, and that's what a jobber is. Now, wrestlers have different types of the way you finish a wrestling match, and usually, like I said, they're decided ahead of time, 9 times out of 10, who's going to win, who's going to lose. Now, you have some wrestlers that are submission wrestlers. What they do is they put some type of hold on their opponent, which causes them excruciating pain and makes them tap out or say, "I quit." Tap out means they tap their leg or they tap the mat or whatever, and they say, "Oh, tap, tap, tap." They hit the mat or they tap a part of their body or whatever with their hand, and they signify that they've quit. Or they put on something like a sleeper hold, which knocks the opponent out. That is a submission way of winning. The other type is by pin, obviously, where you beat your opponent up so bad, and then he lays down on the mat, and you roll him onto his back, and You make sure his shoulders stay down on the mat for a count of 3. 1, 2, 3. The ref will count 1, 2, 3 and tap the mat, and he doesn't lift his shoulder up, or you don't lift his shoulder up, and that's a pin. Now, the other way is by disqualification. And there are so many ways of getting disqualified. And there's also double disqualifications. And there's also countouts, which is a type of a disqualification. And if you have questions about those, because there's so many, I'm not really going to get into those right now. I might in a future episode, but I don't know. But if you do have questions, feel free to ask about those, and I'll be happy to respond to them. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to professional wrestling is these last two very important people. Two important types of people. And the types of people are marks, which are people that fully believe everything that you see on television, in a wrestling ring, in a pay-per-view, and live is 100% real. Crazy. I know. But there are still a few people out there. The other type of person is called a smart mark. Oh, sorry. They're called a mark. They believe, that person that believes absolutely everything is real, they're called a mark. Yeah, like a mark for a guy that gets hit in New York or Bangkok or any major city and kind of gets taken advantage of. Yeah, absolutely. Same thing. Same idea. It's a mark. It's a person that absolutely believes everything that he sees in wrestling. 100%. Now, there are fewer and fewer, but there still are some out there. Now, the other type is a smart mark. A smart mark is a person who willingly suspends his ideals or what he believes is true for the time that wrestling is on. I'm one of those people. Absolutely. When I'm watching wrestling, I believe it. When I'm watching a movie on wrestling, it's like watching a movie. You know, you suspend your beliefs for that period of time, while that show is on, while that movie is on, while that program is on. You know, so when it comes to wrestling, I would absolutely call myself a smart mark. I do love it. I don't watch it all the time. I kind of have it in the back of on the distant radar, as you might say. So I kind of have a loose idea of what's going on. And I listen to a few different podcasts from time to time from professional wrestlers. And I like to kind of keep up with it. And I talk to friends about it. They kind of tell me what's going on. But I absolutely do believe I'm kind of a smart mark. I'm not a mark per se. Now, that's it for my wrestling terminology. If you have any other questions about wrestling terminology, please feel free to send me a message. You know, at all the different ways that you can contact me. So I hope you haven't bored you too much. Now, I want you to always remember, you're never too old to learn something new. So go out there and learn something. All right, thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Please rate my show or leave a comment or make suggestions of what you would like me to talk about. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Dom Dumais, on Twitter at Dom Dumais, and on Instagram, Dom_Dumais. Thanks a lot.